The world did not collapse all at once. It cracked quietly under the weight of war, debt, and scarcity. Every major economic collapse in history followed the same pattern. First came conflict, then came inflation, then came a sudden realization money was no longer the most valuable thing people possessed. What mattered was what they could still do. Today, as global war spending surges, supply chains fracture, and currencies are quietly strained, governments are preparing for economic resilience, not comfort. And once again, the rules of survival are shifting away from paper wealth and toward something far older and far more durable. This is not a prediction. It is a pattern. From the fall of the Roman Empire, to the financial devastation of World War I, to hyperinflation in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, economic collapses did not erase societies. They reorganized them. And in every case, certain skills outlived currencies, markets, and political systems. These skills were not glamorous, they were not speculative, and they did not rely on financial systems functioning normally. They were skills that remained valuable when money failed, when trade stalled, and when war redirected entire economies overnight. As modern economies once again pivot toward militarization and fiscal emergency, the same conditions are reemerging: labor shortages, rationing, infrastructure stress, and rapid institutional change. The question is no longer whether disruption is coming, but who remains economically relevant when it does. This documentary examines the skills that survived every economic collapse in recorded history, why they endured, how they were protected, and why they may soon matter again. Not as a matter of lifestyle, but as a matter of leverage. If you want serious, historically grounded analysis of how war reshapes economies and how individuals adapt when systems fail, subscribe now. What comes next will not be explained in headlines. Economic collapse is often imagined as a sudden event. In reality, it unfolds in stages, each one reshaping what society rewards and what it discards. History shows a consistent sequence. First, war or systemic conflict expands state spending beyond sustainable limits. Governments debase currency, borrow aggressively, or impose extraordinary controls. Markets distort, prices rise unevenly, trust erodes. Then comes reallocation. During the late Roman Empire, prolonged military campaigns drained silver reserves, coinage lost purity. Taxation intensified. Urban commerce declined, yet the economy did not vanish. It shifted toward subsistence, logistics, and local production. Skills tied to food, transport, construction, and repair became more valuable than abstract trade. Centuries later, Europe experienced the same transformation during the 30 Years' War. Entire regions were stripped of wealth, but not of necessity. Blacksmiths, millers, carpenters, medics, and logisticians remained indispensable as armies moved and civilians adapted to scarcity. The pattern repeated during World War I. Industrial economies mobilized rapidly, redirecting labor away from consumer markets and toward production, repair, and supply. Financial assets fluctuated wildly, but skills connected to infrastructure, manufacturing, medicine, and energy became state priorities almost overnight. Hyperinflation in the early 20th century revealed the same lesson even more starkly. In economies where wages lost value by the week, those who could produce, fix, heal, transport, or secure goods retained bargaining power, often outside formal currency systems. Across continents and centuries, collapses did not reward adaptability in theory. They rewarded usefulness under constraint. What changed from era to era was technology. What did not change was demand. When trade networks fractured, local capability mattered. When imports disappeared, repair replaced replacement. When currency failed, barter reemerged around skills, not possessions. The late 20th century did not break this cycle. It merely obscured it. Modern economies outsourced resilience in exchange for efficiency. Skills were abstracted into credentials. Systems optimized for stability until stability became fragile again. Today, war-driven supply disruptions, energy insecurity, and fiscal stress are compressing timelines. What once took decades now unfolds in years. Understanding which skills persist across collapses requires looking beyond ideology and toward necessity. History does not reward innovation alone. It rewards continuity. The next section will break down specific categories of skills and how they functioned when money, markets, and institutions failed. When economic systems break down, survival does not hinge on abstract value. It hinges on execution. Across collapses, the same functional categories reappear, not as trends, but as structural necessities. These skills do not depend on markets working smoothly. They function precisely when markets fail. The first category is food production and distribution. During collapses, food supply becomes a national security issue. Farmers, millers, bakers, butchers, and transporters retain relevance regardless of currency conditions. In war economies, food skills are protected, rationed, and prioritized. Those who control calories control stability. The second category is repair and maintenance. When replacement goods disappear, repair replaces consumption. Mechanics, machinists, electricians, metalworkers, and tool makers become indispensable. During World War II, entire civilian populations were retrained to maintain equipment far beyond its intended lifespan. Skills that extend functionality gain exponential value. The third category is medical and health services. Collapse increases injury, disease, and psychological stress. From Roman field medics to modern trauma specialists, health skills never lose demand. Importantly, these skills often operate outside formal compensation systems when currency fails, exchanged directly for goods, protection, or status. The fourth category is infrastructure and energy. Water systems, sanitation, power generation, heating, and fuel logistics become choke points during instability. Those who can build, maintain, or restore these systems operate at the intersection of civilian survival and military necessity. Historically, such skills are absorbed quickly into state or military structures. The fifth category is security and logistics. When systems weaken, movement becomes risky. Guarding, transporting, storing, and coordinating resources requires skill and discipline. From caravan guards to modern supply chain coordinators, logistics determines whether societies function or fragment. What unites these categories is not complexity, it is indispensability. None rely on speculative demand, none depend on financial abstractions. They persist because they address immediate human needs under constraint. Importantly, these skills often gain power as formal employment collapses. They migrate into informal economies, barter systems, or direct state use. In every historical collapse, those with practical capabilities negotiated from a position of leverage. The collapse itself is not the event. The event is the redefinition of value. The next section will explain why these skills gain strategic importance, how states, militaries, and institutions actively protect and prioritize them during crises. When economies fracture under the strain of war, states stop thinking in terms of growth and begin thinking in terms of continuity. At that point, skills are no longer part of the labor market. They become strategic assets. This shift happens quietly. Governments facing collapse prioritize capabilities that preserve order, supply essential goods, and support military logistics. Skills that align with these objectives are shielded from disruption, sometimes formally, sometimes through informal protection and preferential access. Food production is the first pillar. Throughout history, regimes that failed to secure food supplies collapsed rapidly. As a result, agricultural and distribution skills receive early intervention: ration systems, price controls, fuel allocation, and labor exemptions. Those who can grow, process, or transport food often find themselves protected, not because of compassion, but necessity. Infrastructure follows closely. Water, energy, and transport systems are treated as non-negotiable. In collapsing economies, technicians capable of maintaining these systems gain leverage disproportionate to their official status. During wartime Europe, engineers and electricians were often restricted from frontline service because their skills were considered more valuable at home. Medical capability becomes a force multiplier. Healthy populations fight, work, and comply more effectively. Medical professionals are absorbed into state frameworks, sometimes under emergency authority. Their value does not fluctuate with currency. It compounds with crisis severity. Repair and manufacturing skills rise in parallel. As imports fail and factories retool for war production, the ability to repair machinery becomes as important as building new equipment. States actively retrain populations to preserve industrial capacity. Scarcity turns maintenance into a strategic discipline. Security and logistics complete the structure. Without secure movement of goods and personnel, all other capabilities fail. Historically, those who could organize, protect, and coordinate supply lines wielded influence well beyond their numbers. These skills matter because they reduce dependency. A state under pressure cannot afford fragility. It rewards resilience, redundancy, and local capability. Skills that shorten supply chains and reduce reliance on external systems gain protection. This creates a hierarchy of relevance. Those aligned with survival functions remain employable, protected, and mobile. Those tied to abstract systems, finance, entertainment, non-essential services, face instability as priorities narrow. Importantly, this hierarchy is not announced. It emerges through policy decisions, labor exemptions, resource allocation, and legal adjustments. By the time it becomes visible, reorientation is difficult. Understanding this strategic logic explains why certain skills persist across collapses. Not because they are timeless, but because they are necessary when options disappear. The next section will bring in expert and institutional analysis, how modern intelligence and policy frameworks assess labor resilience under conflict and economic stress. According to institutional risk assessments, Yet labor resilience is one of the earliest indicators analysts monitor during periods of economic stress. Long before currencies weaken publicly, intelligence and policy bodies evaluate which segments of the workforce remain functional if markets fragment or state control tightens. Their conclusions are remarkably consistent. Defense economists emphasize that modern wars are not fought solely with weapons. They are sustained through logistics, maintenance, healthcare, and infrastructure. Skills that support these functions are categorized as continuity critical. In internal planning documents, these roles are treated with the same seriousness as fuel reserves or strategic materials. Security analysts note that during prolonged conflict, governments quietly map labor dependency. Which skills can be automated, which can be outsourced, which cannot be replaced quickly. Those that fail all three tests become protected assets. Think tank research on post-conflict recovery reinforces this pattern. Economies do not rebuild through financial innovation first. They rebuild through physical capability. Roads are cleared. Power is restored. Water systems are repaired. Medical capacity is stabilized. Only then do markets and institutions return. Academic studies of hyperinflationary periods reveal another insight. Wage stability correlates more strongly with skill scarcity than with credential level. In other words, practical expertise outperforms formal qualification when systems are stressed. A certified professional without operational utility loses relevance faster than a technician who can keep systems running. Military historians add an important nuance. During collapse, skill holders often become semi-autonomous. Their value grants them bargaining power with both civilian authorities and armed groups. This is not a moral observation. It is a structural one. Control follows necessity. Modern intelligence assessments also highlight a risk inversion. In stable economies, specialization is rewarded. In unstable ones, versatility matters more. Skills that can be adapted across sectors, repair, coordination, problem solving under constraint, outlast narrow expertise tied to specific systems. Experts warn against romanticizing this reality. Survival skills are not empowering in the abstract. They become valuable because alternatives disappear. Their importance reflects systemic failure, not opportunity. From a policy perspective, this is why governments invest heavily in retraining programs during crises. They are not creating jobs. They are preserving capability. The consensus across intelligence, academic, and policy analysis is clear. Economic collapses do not eliminate labor value. They reprice it brutally. The next section will present the opposing view, the argument that modern economies are different and that historical skill patterns no longer apply in an age of automation, digital finance, and global interdependence.